Hello and welcome. You're here with me, Charlie Tumbler, and I am sitting in my beautiful F-86 Sabre here, and I'm going to show you how to start this aircraft up. I've already got it loaded with, just got to do here, we've got external fuel tanks, we've got some rockets, and you'll notice that the air brakes are currently open, which is how the default setting is. Inside the cockpit, first key that we're going to need is going to need the radio to talk to our ground crew, and that is this one here, communication menu, and the default is left slash. So I'm going to start with some ground electrical power and turn that on.
Chief, turn on the ground power.
They're doing their thing out there.
Copy. Ground power is now on.
And we can see that our fuel gauge kicks in when the ground power is on, so that's a good way to remind ourselves. And then we have these switches down here. We're going to turn the engine mouse on, and then with the left click I'm going to push this down for about a second or so and let go. And what we should see is this little needle is creeping up slowly, and we can hear it in the background. So when it gets to about 3 or 4%, the next key we're going to push is throttle start engine, and that's the default as a home key, and we can push that. We're going to push that twice, a few seconds apart. So push it the first time. This should now go up to 10. If you push it and it hasn't done it, then what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to do kind of the opposite. So if it goes wrong, you need to do the stop engine key, and then turn all the batteries off, turn them back on again, and then hit that again. So we've done it one time, and that's moved our throttle from like off into this intermediate position. Going to push home again. That brings it up into idle, and we see this is going to go up to about 15 to 20. So that's very much the start. Now we can tell the ground crew to disconnect.
Chief, turn off the ground power. Copy.
And then we can work our way around the cockpit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close the canopy so that
Ground power is now off.
And that is with a right click and hold. It closes it. And I always like to click this. It doesn't do anything, but it's nice to do. What we're going to do then is we're going to go a sweep around the cockpit. First off, we want this light to come off. So if we left click on this button, it just changes the pressure system basically, and gets rid of that little warning light. I always like to have my guns ready, so we have off just the upper guns, the mid guns, the lower guns, and all guns. Obviously we want all guns. Those speed brakes that were sticking out outside, we can close them with a right click, and if we look outside, they're now closing. And then once they're all the way in, you can just put it back into the kind of middle position so that they're ready. If you want flaps to take off, we'll do that before we get airborne, but that would be the flap handle. You just left click on it. You can do it if you want to taxi, but I just don't bother. Then we have our fuel tank system. So this tells you which fuel tanks we want to use, and at the moment I have got, can we see them from here? We can't see them. We've got two big ones on the outer pylons, 120 gal actually, they're kind of medium size. So they're the outer pylons is the main thing. So what I need to do is click to outboard on and jettison. So what that means is they are ready and feeding into our main tank, and then if I hit this jettison button, which I'm not going to do now, those tanks will fall off. The cool thing about the outboard tanks is when they do run out, we'll get a big bright light here, and that'll tell us. If we're on the inboard tanks, so if we have two little ones, we don't get a light when we run out. What we have to do is we have to look at the fuel gauge, and what happens is that the tanks by default will feed into the main tank and keep this topped up, and then when it stops feeding in there, when they're empty, this will start dropping down. So if you ever see that this is below 29.5, then that means that your inboard tanks are empty. But we don't have those, so we go back to the outboard anyway. And this panel here is for your lights if you want those, but we don't need to worry about those with startup. The green switch down here is our oxygen, and we definitely want that on. If you want to change things like the QFE, your aerodrome pressure, so that it reads 0 when you're on the ground, you can do that at this point as well. So that's 0. We don't need to fiddle with any of these buttons up here. What I do like to do though is, here is our gun sight. We have a little basic radar in here that will track enemy aircraft, and what we can do is you can tell it how big the wingspan of your target aircraft is in feet. And the main thing we're going to fight is MiG-15s, and a MiG-15 wingspan is 33 feet. So if you put that down to the left here, just in front of the 30, then that's that setup. I'm going to use a weird key combination now. Let me see if I can see what it's called on here. Cool. So cockpit camera move down, which is right control, right shift, and the number pad. So if you use right control, right shift, and the number pad keys, you can move your pilot's head around inside the cockpit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push that now, and I'm going to switch down a bit. And what we should see down here is a gun sight. What we can do is make sure we do our last checks. So we're coming down to this bottom panel. So that's gun sight, and that's our guns. Again, we don't see the gun sight. What I'll do is I'll need to put a little bit of throttle in here to power up the electrics, and we'll see the gun sight in there. But we're set up. We're on guns, and I have rockets on the outside. A missile is for air-to-air missiles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look this way, and this is my gun sight selector. So at the moment it's set to guns, and if I wanted to then fire rockets, you would click it across the rockets and it makes small adjustments. And then this little dial here adjusts the angle for what kind of angle that you want to attack on. And that's personal preference. The default is 17. But what I'll do is I will leave it in gun for now, and then when we go to rockets I will flick it across. Also, to get my rockets ready, you don't have to do this, but you have this little switch here, and what you can do is if you flick it down, when I push and hold the trigger it will constantly fire rockets until they all go. If I put it to up, which you can't quite see there, then when I press and hold the trigger it'll fire one rocket, and I have to tap every time to fire it, which is the way I prefer it. And I do like to be ready for combat. We don't need to worry about anything on this side. What we have here is our navigation system, so I like to set that up. For the mission that I'm flying on, I've been told that I need to set the navigation thing to 740. So well, because I don't have any power when I click these switches, because I've turned the ground power off, that won't move anything. So what I can do is if I just power up a little bit, you can see as I powered up my gun sights appeared. So I'm not taxiing out, but I'm running the engines up, and that's kind of powering up the gun system. And there you can see the gun sight. So I'm going to just move my head down a little bit more with that key, right shift, right control, and down. And then when I click this, it's not doing it. I still need more power than this. There we go. Let's try that. So I've turned it on first, and then for the beacon I need to go to, it's a beacon of 740. So you look at the range for the selector, and you have to kind of see which one it is. So 740 is in that range, so we've got that tab. And I know the 740 is there, so I'm going to turn this handle using my middle mouse wheel. And you see it's picking up other signals, but I want the one at 740. I think it's actually just before 740 there. We should hear Morse code. Cool. That is the Morse code of the thing I want to do. You'll have to look on online to see what the Morse code numbers are. But what that relates to is, let me just quickly zoom out. Where is the beacon? It's up here. Here's the 740 beacon, and that Morse code is VX to mic, so it's actually broadcasting the Morse for V and the Morse for M. So when I get airborne, I can fly straight to that. And the way I can see that in the cockpit, just as a quickie, this isn't a navigation tutorial, but this arrow here, when I've got this solid, when I've got that noise and I can hear it, that is pointing to where it is. So it's not on a heading of 270, it's actually to my left on a 270. So what I need to do is I need to get that, I would need to keep turning left 90 degrees regardless of my current heading. So I'd actually be on a heading nearer 300 and then follow that. But that's a different tutorial. If the beeping annoys you, you can turn the volume down, or if you're not using it, if you just get airborne, point at it, and then you want to turn it off for a bit, you can just click it off and it goes quiet again, but you will then lose the needle. The next thing is the frequency selector, so you can turn that on, and then you put on whatever channel you want. These are all pre-programmed, so if your mission editor hasn't told you what frequency, then it's a bit of a pain. You can go into the mission planning screen, just plunk yourself down on the ground, and then if you click on your plane you can see what all the pre-programmed channels are by default. And I know for this mission particularly, channel 13 is the correct frequency to talk to this airfield here, because I've got it programmed in 13. It's lit up in white to tell me that is the right frequency, because I've got it on advanced comms, so I could just request startup.
In field 1-1.
And you should reply
request
that.
startup.
Okay. So that is the right frequency. This doesn't do anything, so you don't need to set it up, but I tend to, just in case they ever put IFF in, just put it to normal. And that's the startup. All we need to do now is taxi out and depart.
Minvodi, in field 1-1. Request taxi to runway. Enfield 1-1. Minvodi, clear to taxi to runway
The Sabre is quite a nice plane to taxi. It does have a nose wheel steering button. I'll just show you that one. There we go. Nose wheel steering. I have it on my joystick, and it's a press and hold button. Unlike some other planes that can do on and off, you have to press and hold. And then I'm just using my rudders, which are on my joystick as well. So I don't have pedals. Taxi out. As you can see, that gun sight position is really annoying and it changes all the time. Just pop ourselves down a bit. I'll quickly scoot down here. Just nose wheels, a little bit of throttle, and using the rudder pedals. It's got a caster wheel on the front, so if you're taxiing and you kind of line up, you are in mid-turn when you line up, which I'll show you in a second if that makes sense. You might get airborne, and well, when you try and get airborne, it'll throw you off to one side, which is a real pain. So when you line up, just go forwards and creep forwards a few feet before you actually get airborne.
Enfield 1-1, unable to clear for takeoff.
Yeah, that's because I'm really dullard. Right, so that I'm definitely going forwards now. I'm not using nose wheel steering. So we can go. Now if you want to use the flaps at this point, you can wrap them down, but you generally don't need it unless you're carrying a lot of fuel. I've never had to use flaps, but we'll put it down just because it's nice. And then all you need to do is the standard stuff. Wheel brakes are on, power's up. We'll wait for the engines to kick in up here, and then release the wheel brakes. You may need to use a tiny bit of the nose wheel steering, like this, but once you get to about 50 or 60 kilometers an hour or miles an hour, you get. I'm now just using my rudder and not using the nose wheel steering. And the speed gauge is here, and you can start pulling back at about 130, 140, depends on your load. And we've got flaps as well, so it should be relatively easy. Up we go. Gears up. We're established on a good rate of climb. Pop the flaps up. And we're off to go do some murder. I'm not going to do a weapons tutorial, but I will just quickly show you you'll need two fire buttons for this one. Let me just go on to just controls. So you have your main trigger. So it's called the second D10, which is gunfire. That's going to fire your cannons, which however many you've selected on that left-hand panel. And then you also have weapon release, which will either drop your bomb, fire your rockets. If you're in missile mode, then your gun trigger, so this one, the gunfire button, will fire your missile rather than the rocket. But because we're on rocket mode, so we've got it on guns here. Doesn't matter about the pipper for when I just push these buttons, but when I fire my gun trigger, that's the trigger, and then if I push the rocket button, that will fire the rockets. And that's it. That's startup, taxi, and a quick bit of takeoff. I'll do some more tutorials on this if there's any interest, but until then, happy hunting, stay safe.